This is my journal. I will probably write about 4 times a week. After one of my calls, one of my last calls, I had a bad day, I had a good day. It doesn't matter what kind of a day I had. If there is something that really stood out to me that day, it's going on the journal. From the journal, I'll read it and I'll go ahead and make a video of it. Selfishly, because I like to basically write it down. From writing it down, I want to synthesize all of the information that I have on the book and just communicate it in a way. When I'm communicating it in a way, everything just lands a lot harder and I'm able to solidify my ideas. Now, one of my biggest mistakes that I've learned up to this point right now is that just recently, in the very beginning of my sales journey, I started off with the notion of the conversation is for the prospect and not for me. And somehow, over these last 16, 18 months that I've been a part of my journey, I want to say probably towards month 8, I started drifting away from this concept of the conversation being centralized around the person and not me. And so what ended up happening is, as I started drifting away from this concept, is that I started making a lot more statements during the conversations. I started making a lot more statements. I started making a lot more assumptions. And I started using stronger frames that I was drilling the prospect with. And I realized their ego was going up and my ego was going up as well. And I was trying to defeat them with my ego. What did that lead to? Lower conversion rates. I wasn't closing as much. Until just recently, I think it was about last week, one of my members in the company, we had a loss call review day, and he ended up sharing his call. Fantastic guy. In the very beginning, great intro. He went into discovery, and about 5 minutes into discovery, he stopped and he pivoted into the pitch. It was about 8 minutes into discovery. He asked a couple of questions and then he went into the pitch. What happened was that in the very beginning of that conversation, the prospect presented a really strong frame towards him. And that made him a little bit fearful of asking certain type of questions that he had in mind for discovery, and he didn't ask them. So instead of asking those questions, he just directly transitioned into the pitch. And at that moment, I realized what I have been doing up to this point. Because if you're putting the focus on yourself during the discovery, and if you feel a little bit of resistance and you're not asking certain questions because it makes you a little bit fearful of asking, and you're a little bit resistant and hesitant towards asking them, and then you transition into something else, you have successfully put the focus on yourself and not the person that you're speaking to. As soon as you start putting the focus on yourself and how you are feeling from asking certain questions, you stop listening to the person that is communicating towards you. And if you want to be a really effective communicator, you have to be a great listener before that. And how can you communicate and ask good questions if you're not listening to the person? So all of this to circle back on that lesson that I got from one of my friends that ended up sharing his call recording was that if we are in the conversation and you feel a little bit of resistance and you're putting the focus on yourself and you're pivoting the conversation into the pitch rather than going deeper in discovery and asking better questions that are simple, that might be a little bit difficult to say and ask, but those are the ones that have the most growth. And so just to circle back from the very beginning that I mentioned, I ended up drifting away from it. I ended up drifting away from it because the way that I thought about it was, why am I going to be asking this type of question to this prospect if it's so simple to answer? But the fact that it's so simple to answer and you feel a little bit of resistance towards asking it is the reason why you should also ask it. Because we have to keep in mind that these questions, they aren't going to be for you. These questions are more for the prospect. I'll give you an example of a couple of them. Well, one of them that I've shied away from a lot is, how has that been affecting you personally? The other one is, how has that had an impact on you? How long has that been going on for? Those type of questions that are quite simple, I completely drifted away from them. because I thought they were quite basic and I was viewing them as, rudimentary level. And my ego got in the way of it and I drifted away from it and the conversions dipped over time. And now that I look back on my calls, I've realized I've been thinking about it all wrong. I've been so focused on myself and not the person that I've been speaking to that it got in the way of how I was communicating my thoughts. Right after that recording that I ended up seeing from one of my friends from when he transitioned from the discovery to the pitch, I thought to myself, I've been thinking about this all wrong. I was looking at my previous call recordings and I was making so many statements to the person. I wasn't asking them a lot of questions. I think my talk time ratio to listening ratio was I was speaking a lot more than the person. I think I was speaking about 60%. They were speaking about 40%. The next call that I had, I ended up trimming everything down. I trimmed down the fat. I kept everything quite basic, very simple. I started asking, instead of making statements and assumptions about the person, I started asking them questions. A lot more questions that I would have had otherwise. And those questions weren't for me. They were for the person to arrive at a lot more clarity in relevance to their situation, the pain that they're having, and their goals as well. As soon as I did that, I felt during the conversation that the person he felt I was listening a lot more. He was arriving at a lot more clarity. He was understanding the situation that he was actually in, because sometimes people don't even recognize how long they've been working at a job for. I asked him, what are you currently doing for work? He said XYZ. I told him, how long have you been doing that for? He said 18 years. As soon as he said that, he stepped back a little bit and he didn't realize how long he's actually been working there for. Sometimes people forget about their own situation, which is why those questions can be very important. Not only for you, but for the person to understand where they're actually at, reality. Then from there, going into the pain, I asked them some deep questions that were very simple. I did feel a little bit of resistance to, but then I recognized I'm putting the focus on myself. I asked those questions for the person, and that's where the real trust was built. Where I was asking those deep questions, he was giving me an understanding of, how he was feeling going through his situation. And we were going through the pitch, and then he said, I'm sold. I haven't even finished the pitch yet. He was a great person. But there's an element of beauty of just asking simple, basic questions that, I think as you move up the ladder and you continue to make a lot more income, you kind of tend to shy away from because you think you've outgrown it. But the fundamentals are fundamentals for a reason. Principles are principles for a reason. As soon as you start to drift away from them, you're going to set yourself up for a very bad approach. And in evolution, pain is the first principle of change. And if you're not asking questions in relevance to the person's pain, you're missing a lot during the conversation, which is what I've realized. So I'm slapping myself back into the line of the principles where I was going away from. But that's been my biggest takeaway up to this point so far as of right now. So cheers to more simple questions and getting a lot more clarity.